we're going to be looking at what the burn is. Now, a lot of personal trainers make their clients feel the burn, and sometimes you hear bodybuilders saying, oh, you know, the burn is what really counts. It's feel the burn, and that's when the fat's melting. We hear all sorts of crazy ideas. But what is the burn? Is it productive? Is it counterproductive? Is it actually helping us in training? So I'm going to show you an illustration now as to where it comes from. We're going to get a little bit scientific, so if I trip over a few words, just bear with me. First, I like to use the analogy of Velcro. So we have the loops in the Velcro, and then the hooks. So the hooks engage the Velcro. This is very similar to how muscles work. So in muscles we have two levels in the myosin and the actin. The myofilaments, we have the myosin and then the actin. So we have myosin, and here we have actin. So the actin and the myosin, they slide over the top of each other. Now in this example here with the Velcro, we have the hooks and the loops engaging. This is also what happens in the muscle. However, in the muscle, rather than hooks and loops, we will have what we call binding sites. So, for example, here on the actin, we will have these binding sites. Now these binding sites are actually primed with calcium. So calcium, we're going to write down here as Ca+, and this calcium lines these binding sites. I'll just change colour now so you guys can see what I'm talking about. Here we have the calcium covering the binding site. Now the hooks, which are the cross bridges, grab onto that, and when they grab and release, and we have movement. So this is what happens on the myofilament on that level. Now this calcium covering the binding site gets pumped in to the muscle. So we're continually using calcium for muscle contractions. Calcium is important for many things, not just for bone mineral density, but also for muscle contractions. So the calcium is being pumped into the muscle, and it's covering these binding sites and allowing us to have a muscle contraction. However, now if we know our science, we know that when we're using our muscles, we're training, we're using carbohydrates. Let's see, that's CHO. We have C6H12O6. So carbohydrates, when we use them, we're going to have these leftover hydrogen ions. Okay, we're going to cross those out, and we'll have 6 hydrogen ions left over. So we have 6 hydrogen ions floating around. This is a muscle that's being used. Okay, so calcium is already in there. As we're starting to use sugar, we have now leftover hydrogen ions floating around within the muscle. This is very, very, very important. So just a quick recap. We have the myosin filament, the actin filament. We have the binding sites, which are normally primed with calcium, allowing us to grab. However, as calcium needs to be pumped in, but now hydrogen is already in there. Now hydrogen, as you can see, and calcium are both positively charged. Now this is where it gets very interesting. So I'll show you now on a little bit more zoomed in level so you guys can get an idea of what's happening, because this will change the way you do your training. This will change the way you feel about the bird. So remember, we have our actin, we have our myosin, we have our binding sites, the calcium, which we'll use red. The calcium is here, the hydrogen is here, which will get to this binding site first. The calcium that needs to be pumped in, or the hydrogen that's already there. So think about that. The hydrogen is very close, so the wrong color there. Hydrogen will get there first. Now, think about a set of push-ups. In fact, if you want to pause the video and do a set, do 30 push-ups, or as many push-ups as you can. Now try to do that a few times, you'll find that every subsequent set's going to get harder and harder. Now, what's happened? The first push-up was very easy, the last push-up was very hard. What's the difference? You haven't gotten any heavier, so what's going on? what's happened is you now have got hydrogen built up in the muscle, right? Hydrogen builds up, covers the binding sites, and instead of having really good fresh Velcro that just kind of really stuck on there and really got nice and glued, now we've just got really crappy Velcro. It's got hardly any traction. So we're trying to do some push-ups and we're just not getting the reps out. So think about that now from a muscle damaging point of view. When we train with weights, the most common theory for weight training is that we want to tear muscle so we can grow hypertrophy, to grow thicker, go back stronger, okay? Now, if we've got less cross bridges engaged, this cross bridge can't engage now. If we've got less contraction, less contractile force, I will just compare these two so you can actually see. Okay, here we have myosin and actin, where the cross bridges are all engaged. Okay, that's when the calcium is fresh and the hydrogen hasn't built up. Now the muscles we've been doing push-ups for 30 seconds, now we can't engage. Maybe we can engage a few of them, but we can't engage the same amount. So as a result, which muscle or at which stage are we going to have most contractile force? It's obvious, the first one. So realistically, now, after 30 seconds, we're going to be doing less trauma to the muscle, less tearing. If we do less tearing, there's going to be less damage. With less damage, there'll be less supercompensation. So think about it now, when we've got the burn is a muscle that is unable to grab properly. If the muscle can't grab properly, then it's not tearing. And if it's not tearing, there's no real reason for it to change and grow. So you think about the burn now. The burn is a sign to say that the hydrogen ions have built up, okay? There's more hydrogen in there. There's calcium cannot coat the binding site. So without calcium coating the binding site, we have an ineffective contraction. Now think about this. Blood travels all around the body. So I'm going to be doing a really hard set of bicep curls. I'm getting a really good pump. I'm feeling the burn. Okay, so realistically I can't lift anymore because the burn's it's just crippling me. I can't lift anymore. Now, do you think that blood is just going to stay locally, or do you think that blood's going to move around the body? Of course it's going to move around the body. So now I've got blood that's just full of hydrogen ions. So I'm going to go off and train another body part. Unfortunately, that blood is now rich in hydrogen ions. Now I'm going to have to remove the hydrogen ions, and how do we do that? Well, we do it through breathing. Our body can break it down. We produce lactate. Now lactate is not a bad thing. Lactate is actually our body's way of dealing with the excessive hydrogen ions. So lactate is actually a very effective fuel source. However, it needs to be broken down in the Krebs cycle, and as you guys know, the Krebs cycle is only activated when oxygen is present. So we need to rest, and we can metabolize the lactate. So a lot of people used to think that the lactate was, we felt lactate 3 or 4 days later, but as we know, that's DOMS. Lactate only really sits around maximal for about 2 hours. So the lactate will break down and will be metabolized. So thinking back now to the burn, is the burn going to be effective? If I'm training a client on the very first exercise, do I want them to feel the burn? If they start to feel the burn, then we're starting to build hydrogen ions. Now if hydrogen ions have accumulated, we can then no longer, well, the blood's fairly rich in hydrogen ions, so it's going to have an ineffective contractile force. So think about that. If we have the burn present, we tear less muscle. If we tear less muscle, then we'll grow less muscle. So the burn, when most bodybuilders would say, oh, you know, it's the last couple reps that count. Well, actually the first few reps is when the contractile force is the greatest. That's why you're most likely to tear a muscle on the first or second rep, because most cross bridges are engaged. Not on the last rep when you have less engaged. So basically what I want you to go away from today's session is, if we're training for the burn, don't think that that's going to be productive in changing a person's physique. If you want to train for the burn, it's very, very practical. Now, if somebody's into lactate tolerance training, you know, if you're a boxer and you need to be able to fight and feel that lactate and still, you know, not drop your arms because your arms get tired, fine. Lactate, train with lactate, train and feel the burn and be able to train through the burn. However, for the average mum and dad trainer, for the average person looking to change their physique, the burn is not necessarily very productive. Let's move that back onto pump classes. So pump classes are all about feeling the pump, feeling the burn. Feel that burn, ladies. Is that burn going to be productive? Now we know with lactate present, we need to remove it we need to remove it with oxygen. So we're going to breathe very, very heavy. Now breathing heavy is great, and we finish the workout, we're breathing very heavy, but did we tear the muscle we needed to tear? That's what you have to ask yourself. So for the purpose of this e-class, I wanted to show you guys what lactate is, or necessarily what the burn is, how the muscles engage. So a quick recap just to make sure you guys understand, because this is a really good lesson. Okay, so we have our myosin, okay? Then we have our actin. Okay, the actin has the binding sites. The myosin has the cross bridges. The cross bridges can only engage a binding site that's covered in calcium. Calcium is pumped into the muscle and is present. Hydrogen ions, they come about from using sugar. So we know that anaerobic training is sugar training, it's without oxygen. So we use carbohydrates, and now we have a leftover hydrogen ions. So the hydrogen eventually accumulates within the muscle, and if there's lots of hydrogen built up in the muscle, we no longer are able to coat the binding sites with calcium. Instead, we coat them with hydrogen, and we have an ineffective contraction. So simply put, feeling the burn is a great way to finish off a client's workout. I love to do it. You know, I love to do drop sets, big giant sets, and you know, they make them throw up, push them really, really hard. But remember, guys, the hard part, the real nuts and bolts of the workout is the start. If you really want to change your client and make them grow, we need to try to keep the burn to a minimum, and then, you know, people will want to feel the burn. And psychologically, it's a great feeling. So we want to finish the workout off, make them feel the burn. Especially, they love to feel the burn in their six pack, don't they? They love fat just kind of melts off. But for us, we want to make sure that we can have maximal contraction. Maximal contraction means maximal cross bridge engagement, and that means maximal force. So when we have hydrogen ions accumulate, the calcium and hydrogen compete for the same binding site. So simply put, once the burn is in the muscle stops being able to contract properly. So thank you for listening to today's session. Today was all about learning about the burn. So watch this clip several times to really understand it, draw it. If you want to explain it to your clients, the best way I explain it is Velcro. The best Velcro you have is fresh Velcro with maximal connectivity. If you want to talk about crap Velcro, old Velcro, you've had it for 2 or 3 years, you've got really no real connectivity there. That's what happens to a muscle when it's been used for 30 seconds or so. That's when the hydrogen ions have accumulated. So train your clients hard, train them hard, try to keep the burn to a lesser degree until you realize that it's time now to just give them hell, make them feel the burn, and get them that feeling of training hard. But the burn is not where the muscle is actually going to grow. The burn stops the muscle from growing.